Good morning. My name is Megan Reeder-Schopp, and I am the Associate Director of Research for BARR Center. Before coming to BARR, I have been in education for over 10 years, and I was at the university level. I served as a Director of Counseling Services and the Director of Disability Services. Within the national landscape, BARR has proven to be one of the most proven system-wide school improvement models in K-12 education. As part of that established research, it is my pleasure to introduce the esteemed panel of research and practice experts as part of the Schools Generating Evidence panel. And bear with me, I'm going to read these bios because I don't want to miss all the accomplishments of these people. Dr. Beth Boulay is the Principal Associate for Apt Associates. She has over 20 years of experience designing and conducting evaluations of education programs that provide actionable evidence to program staff, practitioners, and policymakers. Since 2006, Dr. Boulay has worked with the U.S. Department of Education and over 200 of their grantees to incorporate evaluation methods into their implementation of innovative approaches to improving education. Our next panelist is Dr. Johannes Bos. He is a Senior Vice President at the American Institutes for Research, also known as AIR. He is a Principal Investigator for BARR's I3 validation and scale-up studies. He is a nationally recognized expert in conducting randomized control trials, also known as RCTs, in education and other social policy research areas, and brings more than 25 years of experience in evaluation design, outcome measurement, and impact research. We are also joined today by Dr. Martinrex Kedziora. Dr. Kedziora is the 14th Superintendent of Schools for the Moreno Valley Unified School District, which serves approximately 33,000 students. In his 10-year tenure with the district, the graduation rate has increased from 65.7% to 91.2%. Wow. Dr. Kedziora is involved as a board chairman for the California League of Schools and serves as a committee member of the Urban Education Committee for the Association of California School Administrators, along with many other organizations in education. Dr. Anu Sharma is joining us from the BARR Center team, where she is our senior research scientist. As BARR's original evaluator, Anu has nearly 30 years of experience conducting evaluation and has been integral to testing BARR's effectiveness from its inception. In addition, Anu serves as a strategic advisor to BARR leadership and works to ensure the integrity of the BARR model through research and evaluation. And last, but certainly not least, Angie Jerabek, who is BARR's founder and executive director, developing the model in 1999 and determined to make sure it worked in every school. Angie has pursued all 3 levels of the U.S. Department of Education's I3 innovation grants, growing BARR from 1 school in Minnesota to over 200 schools across the nation. This team of experts have played a critical role in BARR's expansion and success. Please join me in welcoming these esteemed practitioners and researchers to the stage.
Do we have assigned seats? I don't think so. Good morning. I am so excited to be here to talk about data. All right. But we're here to talk about BARR first and foremost, right? So I know you all know this. Say it with me. Same. Better. Better results. But how do you know? How do you know that you're going to get better results for your schools, your students, your teachers? You likely asked this question, right? When you were faced with a decision about whether or not to bring BARR to your school. You knew you could do better. But was BARR the way? Maybe you were skeptical, and quite frankly, I hope you were skeptical. BARR is not a silver bullet. It's not a Band-Aid, right? It is a big shift in the way you were going to do your work. And you were going to have to convince some people to come along for the ride. They were not all going to be bought in right away. How are you going to convince them that this was the right thing to do? How are you going to convince yourself? So put yourself back in that moment and think about what was the evidence that you were looking at. What was the information you were taking in to try to make that decision about whether or not to bring the BARR model to your school? So I'm Beth Boulay, and since 2010, I've been working with independent evaluators generating evidence about whether programs and innovations funded by the I3 program, and now it's called the Education, Innovation, and Research Program, to find out what works for students. But back in 2010, there was little rigorous evidence demonstrating what works for kids. The belief was that decision makers wanted to use evidence and data to inform them about what would work for their kids, but the evidence just wasn't available. Since 2010, the US Department of Education, through these two programs, have invested over $2 billion to over 300 grantees to try to develop the longest list we possibly could get of innovations and practices that work on a whole range of outcomes for kids. BARR, as you just heard, has seized this opportunity and time again have been developing rigorous evidence with partners like these on the stage that BARR works for kids because they wanted to look educators like you in the eye and say, we're evidence-based, we will help you achieve better results, and we have the evidence to back that up. The BARR Center team has long understood that evidence that comes from schools, for schools, is going to be far more helpful in helping people make decisions. And at least 78 schools, I think, are in this room that participated in that research. So these were schools that were willing to adopt and implement as well as measure, track, reflect, and learn, and ultimately generate evidence about whether BARR achieves better results for students. The evidence comes from schools that are real-world schools with real challenges, real issues happening in their schools. This is not done in a little microcosm and in a little lab under perfect conditions, because quite frankly, what good would that evidence do? How would that help a decision maker understand whether or not to adopt this model in order to achieve better results for their schools? So at this point, we're going to hear about this evidence journey that BARR has been on to try to demonstrate through data that they do, in fact, achieve better results when partnering with schools and teachers and school leaders just like you. But so you might think that that evidence journey's over now, right? But this BARR community understands that demonstrating that something can work is different from saying that it will work or that it is working. That's one of the reasons why the constant examination of data is at the heart of the BARR model. So all of you, whether you're part of one of the research studies or not, are part of the evidence-building journey for BARR. Every day, you are achieving better results for your students, and you're demonstrating it through data and reflecting on those data to ensure that you continue to improve and to continue to deliver those results for your students. So now let's get to it. Let's hear a bit more about our evidence-building journey and what that means for school leaders just like you.
Thank you, Beth. I'm going to just kind of put the landscape in because people have asked, why have you done 20 years of research? So in the spirit of candor, I was a bit of a cynical educator. And so when I developed the BARR model, I kept thinking, This should work in any place because it is using our same students and it's giving the power to the educators. I keep going, the educators in the field have the solutions. How do we open up these silos? How do we bring this forward? So I had kind of two strong belief systems. When half the students were failing at the school I was at for 5 years in a row, it wasn't because the students weren't talented, and it certainly wasn't because my colleagues weren't talented. I worked with amazing colleagues. So I kept going, something is misaligned with the system because this is not a result of our students or a result of our staff. In our school at the time, we had advisories, we had PLCs, we had teacher team meetings, we had student study teams. So it also wasn't like these quote unquote ingredients weren't there. They weren't put together. They didn't feed each other. There wasn't transparency on what happened in student study team. Advisories, maybe a teacher would know about the information. Our school actually was effective in getting rid of advisories 4 different times because we didn't like to do touchy-feely things. So this was not kind of an easy audience. So when I came up with this idea, I also tended to be the educator in the back of the room with my arms crossed. So I was committed to say, I'm not going to ask anyone at my school or at any other school to do this unless we knew this worked. And we knew this worked kind of based off of many, many measures. People have also asked, why is your footprint so large? Quite frankly, people would come to me and say, oh, sure, it works there in Minnesota. It's never going to work in a big bureaucratic district. So I'm like, well, let's go. Let's go to Boston. Let's go to Baltimore. Let's try it. If it doesn't work, we'll know, and then we'll change. They're like, oh, it works there. It's not going to work like in rural America, West Virginia, Kentucky. It wouldn't work there. So I'm like, well, let's try it. If it doesn't work, then we won't do it. So I have been deeply committed just because of my passion. I also believe strongly in the profession of education, and it needs to be professional. I keep going, if I was a doctor, I'm not going to tell a patient to do something and someone hasn't tested it before. So I kept going, educators need the same importance and level of respect to say, don't give me something that if I follow it, I don't know that it's going to likely lead to these results. Which is why I'm so appreciative of all of you when I've been coming to your door to say, hey, want to do a randomized control trial? And you've been willing to, because I'm like, we need to have this become more normative to say, let's see if this works. And by the way, if it doesn't work, bail on it. I've said that to all of you leaders I see out there. I'm like, if it's not working, don't keep doing it. If it is, let's move it forward. So that's a bit of the history, and then I got to work with these brilliant, brilliant leaders and evaluators, but that's kind of why we're on this journey.
My turn to talk about this evidence journey. Is my microphone working?
Yes.
Okay, great. When you're sitting up here, you never know if what you're saying is really being heard. As you heard, Angie is fearless, and she is also not afraid of the truth. And I have to say, I came on early on in the BARR journey of evidence because she really did want to know the answer as to whether this was working or not. So spoiler alert, this model works, and it keeps on working. So how did we have the confidence to test this model? We had some early results in the first 10 years, from 1999 to about 2010 in St. Louis Park, Minnesota. And I know many of you are here from that school, and you worked really, really hard to get this model up and running. So here's the early evidence from St. Louis Park. The graph on the left shows the achievement level of St. Louis Park students in the solid lines compared to state averages, which are the dotted lines. And you'll see that our students in St. Louis Park consistently did better than the state averages. But what's more important, well, I shouldn't say more important, equally important, is that we closed what we called at that time the achievement gap. We now refer to it as the opportunity gap. That black students did just as well as white students over time. That was really, really important. On the right, what you can see in that graph is a huge increase in advanced placement and IB courses, et cetera, taken by students over time. They were seeing acceleration. So what happened also is that we started to get recognition for these results. The ACT gave St. Louis Park the College and Career Readiness Award. We received recognition and funding from Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services, the federal agency known as SAMHSA, and recognition from their National Registry of Evidence-Based Programs and Practices. So people started to pay attention. I should also mention that in these first 10 years, it wasn't just me looking at the data. We had other people. We had Dr. Peter Benson, Dr. Peter Scales, Dr. Bill Johnston, Dr. Craig Edelbrock, some of whom are nationally renowned researchers looking at the data. So it wasn't just me and me alone. Had a lot of help. So based on this data, Angie said, let's test this model elsewhere. We wanted to make sure that it wasn't just one team, one school, one setting, one charismatic leader. How often is that the case? We needed to make sure that other people could do this model. So she said, okay. We applied for and got the first level of funding from Investing in Innovation, something called a development grant. The premise behind the development grant was that you had to have something homegrown from the field, something that was worthy of being tested. Our application, which we never thought would get funded, actually scored number 2 in, Beth, was it 4,000 applications?
Yeah.
I mean, we scored second. We were shocked. So we went to Washington, D.C., Angie and I and several colleagues, we went to Washington, D.C. To the first grantee meeting, and there we got some news. The federal government said, we have bigger plans than what you had put in your proposal, which was a quasi-experimental design to test the model over time, as we had done in St. Louis Park. We want you to do a randomized control trial. Well, I was indignant that they changed the rules on us, but come on, the rules get changed all the time. I really, like, how was I thinking? But I was indignant, and I was going to mount a letter writing campaign in protest. Angie let me rant, and she decided, no, we were going to do a randomized control trial. Because what the federal government was very clear about, they said, if you do not, you will be an asterisk or a footnote in our final report. Any of you who have met Angie know that she is not going to be an asterisk or a footnote in somebody's final report.
I have
Not
to put an
gonna happen.
anecdote real quick. So we're in DC, big meeting. You know, everybody's there, Arnie Duncan, and we're number 2, we're feeling real good. And then they're talking about these randomized control trials. I'm like, I don't think we proposed that. And I kept saying, you know, no, do we do that? No. And so we go out to dinner, and Anu's mounting a big letter writing campaign. And she's got people she's going to write, this is wrong, they can't change the rules. And by the second glass of wine, I'm like, so you know we're going to do it, right? So like, you know, just like, you know, like I don't know what we have to do, but we're going to keep going. She's like, okay, I'll do the letters later. So she's been a great partner. Yes.
I need to give you guys credit, though, because you understood why it was so important,
Yes.
right? Because, as you said, more and more people were paying attention, which means more and more skeptics were getting ready to say, well, it wasn't BARR, it was this other thing. It wasn't BARR, it was because of this other outside influence, right? There's got to be another reason why you saw those effects. And the randomized control trial, those arguments don't work, because the only difference between those kids and these kids are that these got BARR and these didn't. You didn't put all the smart kids over here. You didn't put all the talented people over here, right? They're the same kids. The only difference is they got BARR. And you understood very early on, unlike, quite frankly, many of your development grant colleagues did not go down this road.
They stayed with the letter writing campaign.
Right? And so you got positive effects where nobody could sort of say, no, it was because of this other thing. And you understood that from the beginning and took on that challenge.
Thank you. And not only us, but Hemet High School, who is also here, took on that challenge. We called Dr. Emily Shaw and we asked her, would you be willing to randomize half the 9th grade to BARR and half to control? And she agreed. We also had Angie's experience as a real-world educator. She said it is very rare that something big is rolled out to the entire school body or to the entire class at one time. She told me about smart boards, and she said, you know, when they were rolled out, we started with a few classrooms, and if it works there, then we go bigger. So this is how things are done. And she said, it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. We also had Bucksport High School, and Bill Tracy, Josh Tripp are here. They were from the original block meeting group that met in Bucksport High School. So we had 2 schools in rural Maine and in Southern California that were willing to both do a rural school trial, not a randomized control trial, they were too small, but also in Hemet, the randomized control trial. Now I'll tell you how things are done in the world of research. We had help from other evaluators. We had Beth's colleagues at Apt Associates, but Dr. Jerry Evans, who was on our team, was going up the escalator at the same grantee meeting, while 2 of Beth's colleagues, Chris Price and Mark Moss, were going down the escalator. Jerry said, they could help me design this randomized control trial. He jumped the escalator, he has long legs, and started picking their brains about how they were going to do this. So we started, you can see the characteristics of the study, but one thing I want to point out on the right-hand side, and I'll show you the results from Hemen in a moment, we did get recognition after the randomized control trial from the What Works Clearinghouse. We were invited to submit to the What Works Clearinghouse, and our study met their standards without reservation, which is extremely challenging and difficult to do. So at Hemet High School, we closed the opportunity gap. Failure rates went down, course credits earned went up, and Hispanic students did just as well as non-Hispanic students over time. And then on the right, you can see that BARR students did much better, statistically significantly better than control students on standardized test scores, which also showed that it wasn't a teacher bias, and that was another criticism that we faced. At Bucksport High School, which is the next slide, we couldn't do, as I said, a randomized control trial. They had one block and one very small 9th grade student body, but their results showed the same thing, that over time, their standardized test scores went up. You're going to see growth, 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 and failure rates go down, GPA goes up, and course credits get earned. Hans, I'm going to turn it over to you for the next part of the evidence journey.
Yeah, so the next step in the process when you have a development grant is supposed to be that you go and validate it. So you take what you learned in one school, or in this case 2 schools, and you try to replicate it in a lot of different places and see if it still works. And this is where many different programs fall down. This is like sort of the first big hurdle after you develop something. You can get something that works really well in one place, and then you try somewhere else, and there's some dependency of your success to the environment in which it is being studied that breaks things down afterwards, and that's a really important learning opportunity. And so the first study that AAR was involved in was basically a repetition with 11 schools of the work that Anu and her team did in Hemet. And we had, and this is the validation study. I think we have a lot of these schools here in the room. Others have said it. This work, it cannot be done without the help of the staff and the students and the teachers in the schools. And that is especially true for this validation study, because it uses the randomized control trial, and the randomized control trial is within schools. So you actually have a 9th grade that is split into 2 pieces. Half get the intervention, half don't. And whoever is in the school has to deal with the fallout, with parents asking, why is my kid not getting this beautiful BARR treatment? And actually having to arrange like different teams and keeping them apart, and not being overly avoiding the challenges of sort of having the treatment blend together and disappearing. And so that was all very successful, and some of the results are right there. So I don't have a whole lot of time. I will say later that a lot of these results actually hold up even in a much larger study that we did afterwards. But basically the story in a nutshell is that BARR has very significant effects on academic outcomes, especially course failures. So dramatic reductions in course failures. Given the fact that this is an intervention that doesn't overhaul the whole school, but that actually fits within an existing context, and the fact that it's at the high school level, and I think I've said this to you before, I had never seen effects this substantial before in any of my other studies at that level, and I've been doing this since the mid-90s. So that was really impressive, and then so that's where it all starts, and then you start to explore like what is actually explaining those effects, and we're seeing significant changes in the school environment, significant changes in how teachers think of themselves and of their colleagues and of their students, and also significant changes in how the students experience their school environment. So in the validation study, we actually did a mediation analysis. That's a very sophisticated type of analysis. It's very hard to do actually, where you're trying to connect effects on one outcome to effects on another outcome. So you're saying, you know, we think that the model works by changing the environment. Can we actually say that these changes in the environment actually caused students to do better academically? Sorry, I'm moving my hands the wrong way because from your side it goes from there to there. And we actually did that. We used some pretty sophisticated analysis to do that in the validation study, and found indeed that these changes that are part of the original idea, the original concept of BARR, are indeed the ones that are actually causing these effects. So that was really encouraging. So what did we do next? So we saw that we were successful in those 11 schools, and the I3 program had another version. So we had the original development grant, we validated the results. Now what could we do next? And that's something called scale up. And the size of this audience is really the evidence of scale up. Like, the idea is like, not just can you prove that something will work in more than one setting, but it really is, can you take a model and make it so that it can be rolled out to many, many, many more schools. And that is another major hurdle where a lot of interventions fall down, because it is not that easy. Because now all of a sudden Angie can't be the one to pick up the phone when something goes wrong, because she doesn't have enough time to pick up the phone working with 200 or 300 schools. And so you have to train other people, you have to kind of have different kind of procedures. You got to, you know, basically make the model so that it works at scale. And so we evaluated that. So AR was again the partner. We evaluated that in a randomized control trials with 66 schools, also many of whom are here. Thanks again. And in this case, we randomized the schools, and that makes things a little easier, because now when you're a BARR school, you're really a BARR school, and you don't have to keep those other kids separate. It also made our study a little bit more robust, in the sense that we were now able to actually test that the effects on teachers were real, because we had the whole school, all the teachers in the school were either BARR or control, and I was a little worried about that, to be honest. And so I remember seeing the first teacher survey data coming in and really having one of these feelings like, oh, thank God. The effect, if anything, the effects were bigger than what we found in the validation study in our description there. So bottom line, again, I don't want to take a whole lot of time going through the details. I mean, you see the slides behind me. The report is coming out very soon. But the scale-up study shows essentially the same results as the validation study. And that is exactly, when you're doing this kind of work, is you basically see a model, you see it works, you try to validate it, still works, wow. And then you try to scale it up, and hey, it still works. This is exactly the kind of pattern that you want to see, and it really bodes well for the future of BARR, I think.
Hans, I'd love to get you to comment on one thing that you haven't said, right? So you heard from Anu, who's clearly a dear old friend of the BARR Center, right? Tell us what your experience was, because you were the independent evaluator that they were forced, required to partner with in order to generate this evidence, because we're talking a little bit about the skeptics, right? Maybe all of you were a skeptic at one point or another when you were trying to think about whether this was the right thing to be doing. The skeptics in a much broader scale care a lot about how closely associated the person generating the evidence is to the people who are doing the work.
Yeah, no, I mean, that independence is at the same time really helpful, but it can also at some points be a little scary and confrontational. So you're like most things out there in the world that are being rigorously tested don't work. I think I probably would say somewhere between 70 and 80% of the programs I evaluated over my career didn't work, and most of them you just had null effects. Sometimes you even have negative effects. That's a very difficult conversation to have. You have somebody who believes in their program, you find negative effects. You're like, you thought this was a good idea, but it has some side effects that really are worse than what you're trying to do, and you should either completely overhaul your intervention or stop doing it. And that is the kind of conversation that is hard, but it is really important. I mean, we don't want to waste money, we don't want to harm people, and we want the evidence to stand on its own. And so, as independent evaluators, that's what we do. But at the same time, of course, we like you and we like the programs that we evaluate. We wouldn't be involved with evaluating things that we don't think have a chance. And so you do become a little bit vested in it. So it's a challenging position to be in.
So I'll say a beginning part, our first conversation, which you may or may not recall, and actually was at Hemet, California, and we'll get into Dr. Martinrex soon. You came up and you're like, so I'm new to the program and evaluate it, and I know you had results in the past, but about 80% of them aren't going to, so more than likely we're not going to see anything, which, by the way, was a great conversation. So I was just like, game on, go check it out then. And so, but you were very lovely, but you set expectations to be very disappointed.
And especially, so when we went to the scale-up, we were, first of all, scale-up is hard, and we saw some implementation challenges, and we documented all of those, and so to see the program holding up in spite of those, and then to see the impacts holding up to a large degree, even during the COVID-19 pandemic, I mean, that was pretty remarkable. So we really did not expect, at the end of the scale-up, with COVID hitting, we didn't think we were going to see effects there, and we still saw them. So, and you saw, some of the results. I think I'm going to hand it off before I take any more time. The one thing that I want to highlight is that the top of the independent evaluation game is to have effects on standardized tests that are completely independent of what teachers do, of what teachers think of their students, of how students report things. And throughout both the validation study and the scale-up study, we're seeing those effects as well. And so in the scale-up study, we used the PSAT, and we're seeing impacts there, and we're also seeing continued evidence that BARR is narrowing the achievement gap, or the gaps in achievement between different groups of students. So, and now I'm going to hand it off to someone who can talk about what it's like to be in one of these studies.
Do I just start talking?
Thanks.
Okay. I don't know if you were going to say something to me.
Well, you're a dear friend.
Yeah, but I mean, you don't have to say that. I just thought you were going to.
Actually, okay, I will say one thing. This is a leader I'm so appreciative of because you have been involved in development, validation, and scale-up grant. So to have leaders that are willing to take risks, but once again, discerning risks, and be able to generate evidence for the larger field, I think is a remarkable thing. So that's just...
So I remember stories about when BARR started in Moreno Valley, and the stories are either pre-pandemic or post-pandemic, or we're still in it, but I remember them before. I don't remember the year. I remember things happened. And so I remember when the BARR program started at Moreno Valley High School, I asked the teachers, what's different? What's different about your school? What changed? And they jokingly said, students used to climb over the fence, and we let them climb over it. We didn't stop them. Now we stop them and ask them to come back. And it really stuck with me when I heard that, because I didn't know they did that. I didn't know what fence they climbed, but So one day I was driving past the school. Well, I didn't drive past it, but I drove on the street, and there was a student climbing over the fence. And so I made a U-turn, and I went right back to the school, to the area where the student was climbing the fence, and I walked over to him, and I didn't know what he'd be like. He probably didn't know what I'd be like, but I remember, and when you see that picture up there, it's one child at a time, it's one student at a time. It's not. That's how you change things. You do it one person at a time. And I also remembered that with BARR, it's about the mindset and how you approach things. And so anyway, I went up to this student and I said, "I just saw you climb over the fence." And yeah, I did. And I said, "Well, I'm the superintendent," and I gave him my card. And I said, "You're not in trouble. I just want you to know I care about you, and I want you to know that why did you climb over the fence?" And he said, and then he said to me, "Are you one of those BARR people?" And I said, "Well, I know about that." But I said, "Why did you climb over the fence?" And he said, "Well, I'm hungry, and I don't like the food at school." And it was the morning, it wasn't lunch. And I said, "Oh, so where are you going?" He said, "I'm going to go to Del Taco." And it's not that far, but I said, "Oh." I said, "What did you," and we just started talking, and he started telling, how kids do, they just start telling you stuff. And I said, "So what'd you tell your teacher you were going to do?" Well, I told them I had to go to the restroom, had to go to the bathroom. I said, "Well, they're going to be worried that you're not back yet. And it's going to take longer, probably." He said, "Yeah." I said, "Well, why don't you go to Del Taco, and then you come back, and I'm sure everything's going to work out. It's going to be fine." He looks at me like, "Really?" And I said, "This is my card." And I said, "You have my card, so if you have an issue or a problem, my phone number's on there. It's my cell phone. It's this one right here. And call me if you need something." Now, I know people think, I should have, trust him so much, but he came back, but I went to the school and I talked to the principal, who at that time was LaToysha Brown, and I told her what had happened, and, he told me which class he'd left. And I said, "So just make sure he comes back and, check on him." And she did. But later, I got an email from him, and he told me, and I still have this email at work, that he really appreciated, what I did, but that in the future, he would tell his teacher that he was going to Del Taco. And so I think is that?
Yeah, no,
okay?
but I guess I'll turn this to Beth Boulay, but I have to say, leaders like this, who care so deeply, and once again, kind of emulate this to their staff, but also are committed to this research, is like, and there are so many, but I keep going, you're this exemplar leader of kind of doing this. And I love the fact that he's like, the student's like, "So you with the BARR program?" And you're like, "I'm the superintendent." But yes, your care has just consistently been amazing, as well as your willingness to do this. So I just need to make sure everyone's recognizing this from a very national level, because we wouldn't be here if it hadn't been for you.
Thank you.
Well, we've got time, right?
Yeah.
Well, one thing that really strikes me is the difference in measures, if I'm going to use the evaluation word, right? But it's the things you observe that make you know it's working, right? And for you, you told us an amazing story about how you know it's working because the student recognized the behaviors and the care that you were doing as being associated with BARR, right? You were the BARR guy in that moment, right? That's an observable measure. You measure other things as you were trying to establish for different audiences that BARR was effective. And Hans, you and your team measured even more and more different things. So I think one of the amazing strengths of this panel is that we don't just have one story, we just don't have one measure. We have a whole suite of measures that could take on any skeptic, including the next school leader that's trying to decide whether or not this is the right thing to do, and not just adopt it whole cloth and say, I'm going to hope for the best, but continue to participate in the evidence-building journey to ensure that it is working, that it continues to work, and that if it isn't, like you said at the outset, Angie, abandon ship. Because what a lot of people don't realize is that if I do something that's not working and producing outcomes for my kids, I'm taking time and energy away from something else that might. Right? We don't want to be doing this if it's not working. We want to go find the thing that does work. You go, Hans.
Yeah, I just want to add one thing. I mean, basically what you're describing, these conversations, whenever anyone asks me, like, if I have to explain what BARR is, like in a minute or in one or two sentences, the thing that I always emphasize, and goes back to that mediation analysis, is the importance of relationships, and that really, and you know, there's a lot of interventions that focus on teacher-student relationships, but BARR is the only one that I know that systematically focuses also on teacher-to-teacher relationships and student-to-student relationships. And our evaluation is one of the only ones evaluations are among the only ones that actually have really rigorous measures of those relationships and the quality of those relationships and how people perceive them. And I think that is like it's an early indicator that things are working. So if you feel like you're doing BARR, but you're not seeing improvements and sustained improvements in the quality of relationships between people in your school, you should probably worry that you may be one of the exceptions where it's not working so well. And because it is sort of the thing you want to be able to see. And the way you describe it, this conversation with a student, I think there are a lot of schools out there where those conversations never happen. You know, regardless of how nice everybody is, it just, you know, the infrastructure isn't there to facilitate it. And I think that's, to me, that is the most distinguishing feature of BARR that I've seen across these evaluations.